14-year-old Maya Ellison didn't want to be here, not like this. But there she was, perched awkwardly on a wooden chair that made her look even smaller, thinner, more breakable than she already felt. Her sneakers dangled off the floor like forgotten thoughts. In front of her, a sea of cold, polished shoes, silk ties, and thin smiles, masking fangs. The courtroom was like a shark tank, and she was the splash of blood. The lawsuit, a big deal civil case against Hillmere Holdings. A real estate vulture dressed in legalese and fake philanthropy. These suits had bulldozed whole blocks in East Montgomery under urban renewal. But really, they just wanted to plant condos on the bones of black families who'd been there for generations. Maya's grandma Lillian was one of them. And Maya, she was about to blow the hinges off that polished courtroom door. She didn't want to tell them about the cold nights sleeping in their car after the house was condemned without notice, or how her grandma stopped humming gospel tunes and started crying silently during commercials. Or the way the school counselor kept asking if she was okay, when she hadn't been okay since they stole her front porch. But she told it anyway. Every damn word. "I woke up and they were already ripping our roof off," she whispered. "I thought maybe we were dreaming." My grandma was still in her nightgown. The room shifted. It always does when truth walks in barefoot and uninvited. Even the fancy lawyer for the developer shifted in his seat, eyes twitching like. Maybe he wasn't so sure he was going to win this one after all. But not Judge Vaughn. Old ass Walter K. Vaughn, with his silver hair slicked back, like he'd never missed a tea time, leaned back in his chair, like he was watching a sitcom. "This is bordering on melodrama," he muttered with a chuckle. No shame in his crusty voice. You could hear Maya's breath hitch, like a record scratch. Her lawyer jumped up with an objection. But that damage, already done. That wasn't just disrespect, that was erasure. In real time. Live on the record. Maya froze, then blinked, then tilted her head like a question was forming inside her ribcage. And then came the shift. From the back of the room, someone stood up. Not a suit. Not a lawyer. A woman. Tall in jeans and a worn jacket. She didn't walk down the aisle. She marched straight past the gallery, eyes locked on Judge Vaughn, like he owed her money and a century of apologies. That woman, Judge Clara May. No robe today. No mic. Just fury carved into bone and marrow. "Objection sustained," she said, voice cold enough to shut the room up and hot enough to melt the paint off the walls. "Excuse me, Judge." Vaughn blinked, like a man catching up to a plot twist too late. Clara didn't flinch. "I'm invoking Article 8 judicial misconduct under emergency review. You are hereby being relieved from this case for gross insensitivity and failure to maintain impartiality." The courtroom exploded. Vaughn tried to bang his gavel, but Clara beat him to it, slammed her palm on the table so hard the microphones buzzed. "You just tried to humiliate a child, testifying about being unhoused and traumatized. You don't get to do that. Not anymore." Maya stared wide-eyed. She wasn't crying anymore, just watching. Something in her posture, just like Clara's months ago, had changed back straight chin up. That moment, it wasn't just about her. It was about all the times they'd called her too emotional, too loud, too much. About every girl with cornrows and quiet pain who'd ever been made to feel small in rooms built to ignore her. Vaughn tried to fight it, but the cameras were already rolling. Clara turned to the press like it was a closing argument. "You want a story?" she snapped. "Write this down. Today, a scared kid told the truth and a man in a robe mocked her. But guess what? That robe doesn't make you righteous. Your actions do." The gallery erupted. Again, reporters scrambled to get their quotes right. Security moved in slow, unsure whose side to be on. Even the bailiff didn't budge, just stood there, blinking like he'd seen God blink back. Maya. She exhaled for the first time in what felt like forever, and the world shifted again. Because that courtroom didn't just witness justice. It felt it. You know how most people wait for their name to be called? For permission to speak, Judge Camille Rios didn't play by those rules. She stood calm as a lake in a thunderstorm, her black blazer, crisp gold hoops glinting under courtroom fluorescence. No robe, no badge, just her. A woman who'd sat in enough courtrooms to know when justice was being choked in real time. The back row wasn't supposed to matter. That's where the quiet watchers sat. But Camille, had never been good at quiet, especially not when the law was being spit on in front of her face. She stepped into the aisle. Slow, steady. Heads turned like a wave, crashing against the shore. The air got real still. "I'll be filing for an emergency injunction on this trial," she said. Like she was ordering coffee, not rewriting the day's legal script. Gasps fluttered. The room froze mid-breath. Even Maya, still perched in the witness chair, blinked like she couldn't believe what she'd just heard. Judge Vaughn looked like someone had unplugged his power cord. "On what grounds?" he barked. Voice scratchy, fake confident. Camille turned to him, cool as hell. "On the grounds that I just witnessed a courtroom turn into a stage for cruelty." Boom. The silence after that, thunderous. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to, because when the truth walks in that loud, it doesn't scream, it rings. The bailiff flinched. The court reporter paused, mid-keystroke. A defense lawyer at the side mouthed, "Oh shit!" And from the back of the gallery someone clapped once, just once, and even that single clap sounded like rebellion. Cameras clicked like mad. Phones whipped out. That moment, Camille, poised and fiery, was now immortalized in pixels. You could already feel the headlines loading in real time. Vaughn tried to recover. "You don't have jurisdiction here. Judge Rios." She stepped closer. "No. But I do have authority. And more importantly, eyes. I just watched a child's trauma get mocked from the bench, and I won't be silent about it." Maya's lawyer stepped forward, shocked but emboldened. "Your Honor, if Judge Rios files that injunction, we respectfully move for a mistrial and request reassignment." Vaughn was flailing now. "You people are being theatrical." Camille tilted her head like she was studying a man made of dust. "Theatrical. You laughed at a child's testimony. That was theater, and it was grotesque." The room cracked with tension. Someone whispered, "Is this really happening?" And someone else whispered back, "About damn time." And then Camille turned to Maya. She knelt, not like a politician, not like a headline, just like a woman who remembered what it was like to be small, in a room that treated your pain like fiction. "You were heard," she said softly but firm. "And you mattered. Don't let anyone in this room, anyone, tell you otherwise." Maya didn't speak. She just nodded, a little shaky but solid. You could see her tuck that moment away like armor. By the time security got their heads on straight, Camille had already handed a written motion to the clerk, pulled from her bag like she came prepared to raise hell because she had. She wasn't here by accident. Outside, news vans were already pulling up. Inside, the judge's chambers were buzzing. Vaughn knew what was coming. Suspension scrutiny. Maybe worse. And Camille, she didn't even flinch. Because women like her don't wait to be invited to the table. They flip it. By sunrise, the internet had already done what the system refused to tell the damn truth. The video of Maya's testimony. Her small voice, the cracking silence. Judge Vaughn's smug laugh had hit the web like a match to dry leaves. The caption. Judge laughs at homeless teen's testimony. And that was it. That was the headline that lit the city on fire. By 8 a.m., it was trending. By 10, every major outlet had picked it up. TikTok, Twitter, late-night news. Even Aunt Cheryl was texting about it. The comment sections were a war zone. But one thing was loud and clear. People were pissed. Fire him. Protect Maya. Where's the justice? Civil rights orgs rolled up with statements faster than you could refresh your feed. ACLU and NAACP. Even local student unions. They weren't just calling for Vaughn's resignation. They wanted a full inquiry. Past cases, present bias, the whole dusty trail. By lunchtime, Vaughn was toast. Emergency ethics review. Public censure. Official investigation pending. But the real storm, that was just getting warmed up. Because Judge Camille Rios. Yeah, that Camille got tapped to step in emergency oversight. State wanted someone to clean the mess. Thing is, Camille wasn't interested in cleaning up someone else's mess. She was about exposing it. First day, with the case in her hands, she walked into the courthouse like a surgeon walking into an infected room. Mask off, scalpel sharp. Reopen discovery, she told the clerk. Now, defense counsel blinked. The developer's legal team blanched. You could practically hear the paperwork sweating. You don't have grounds, one of them stammered. Camille hit him with that straight-faced stare. I've got probable cause and a courtroom full of witnesses who saw a child humiliated while your client sat silent. You want to keep pushing, fine. Let's see how your emails look under a microscope. It took less than 48 hours, and baby, when they cracked open the comms files, rot, just straight rot. Emails between Hillmere execs and city zoning officials, secret payments disguised as consulting fees. One thread even joked another grandma out another unit in easy math. Payments to inspectors to look the other way. Private messages referring to cleansing the area. Deleted texts that weren't actually deleted. Thank you, subpoena power. This wasn't just shady. It was a blueprint for displacement. And suddenly, what was once a civil suit was a whole-ass criminal conspiracy. Camille called a special session, didn't waste time. She stepped up to the bench, crisp eyes locked in. Based on preliminary findings and discovery, she said, voice calm but carrying weight, I am submitting a motion to elevate this case from civil to criminal status. Charges to include conspiracy to commit fraud, unlawful seizure of property, and racially motivated displacement. The courtroom went silent. You could hear someone gasp in the hallway. One of Hillmere's lawyers damn near fell out his chair, and Maya, sitting beside her lawyer, didn't say a word, but her eyes, those tired, strong 14-year-old eyes, they held something brand new. Power. Because now the case wasn't just about her. It was about every family they'd done dirty, every front porch stolen, every eviction called development, every voice that had been silenced while men in suits collected checks. Camille didn't just flip the case. She detonated it. And the city was about to find out just how deep the rot went. It was day 3 of the trial, and the courtroom felt like a breathing thing, heavy tight. Like it knew something big was coming. Every seat was full, not just with press, but with people. Families who'd lost their homes, organizers who'd carried picket signs in the rain, elders who'd watched entire neighborhoods vanish under bulldozers. They weren't there for spectacle. They were there for accountability. And Maya, she walked indifferent. Gone was the scared girl clinging to her voice like a lifeline. This Maya stood tall. She wore a plain white shirt, blue jeans, and a quiet fury. When she took the stand again, the entire room leaned in like the air itself wanted to hear her speak. Tell us what you remember, her lawyer said gently. Maya nodded. She didn't fumble. I remember my grandma crying when they gave us 72 hours to leave, she said, voice steady. I remember the man who came to our door said it was just business. I remember sleeping in our car, and I remember seeing our house in a real estate ad 2 weeks later, like we never lived there. Dead silence. Not even the court reporter typed. Judge Rios sat stone-faced, but locked in. Her hand rested against her chin, but her eyes, oh, they burned, like she was listening to the whole history of every broken promise in that one girl's story. When Maya finished, Rios didn't say a word. She stood. Court is in recess, she said simply. Everyone blinked. Wait, what? Cameras snapped as she stepped down, walked out, and disappeared into her chambers without explanation. Whispers ignited. What's she doing? Is something wrong? Is the trial getting paused? 2 hours later, the courtroom was reconvened. But the air was different now, like everyone could feel the ground shifting under their feet. Rios entered, not in her black robe, in a navy blazer and slacks, her Alabama judicial ID clipped visibly to her pocket. There was no bench this time, no elevation. She stood in the center of the courtroom, like a woman leveling the field. I am invoking Article 6, Section 7 of the Alabama Judicial Emergency Powers Statute, she announced. The room exploded. Lawyers gasped. A court clerk dropped a stack of papers. One of the civil rights attorneys whispered, "Oh my God, she's going for it." That statute. It allowed a judge in moments of ethical crisis or community harm to bypass a jury and issue a judicial verdict as a citizen judge when systemic corruption threatened the integrity of the process. Rios looked straight at the defendant, Elijah Braddock, big-time developer, expensive suit, perfect haircut, no soul. She stared him down. This case doesn't need a jury, she said. It needs a reckoning. You could feel the sentence land like a sledgehammer through marble. Your business, she continued, was built on the erasure of black families, on corruption, on silence bought and sold like property. But this courtroom is no longer silent. Braddock looked like someone had ripped the floor out from under him. His lawyer stood halfway stunned, like maybe they'd wake up and this would all be a dream. But nah, it was very real. I have reviewed over 300 pages of evidence, Rios said. Financial records, internal emails, communications between your company and city officials. You did not just commit fraud. You orchestrated a systemic displacement campaign. She paused, turned toward the gallery. To the families in this room, she said, "You were not crazy. You were not irresponsible. You were targeted." Maya's grandma cried softly, a tissue pressed to her lips. Then Rios. Rios turned back. "Elijah Braddock, I find you guilty of conspiracy to defraud, unlawful seizure, and racialized displacement." Boom, gavel slammed. And not just any gavel. Her own, not official, court-issued. One she carried from her time in civil court, the same gavel used in housing rights hearings a decade ago. You want to talk symbolism, that's the damn mic drop. Security moved quickly. Braddock was escorted out the back. No tie left, sweat soaking through his collar. But the real noise wasn't in his exit. It was in the room. People stood, some clapped, some cried. And in the middle of it all, Maya sat still, breathing slow, letting the verdict soak into her bones. Like it might finally wash away some of the years that shouldn't have hurt as bad as they did. Rios didn't wait for applause. She walked out of that courtroom like a fuse that had already lit the fire. Because this wasn't about one man losing a case. It was about a whole city being forced to look, and this time, they couldn't look away. The courtroom was packed again, shoulder-to-shoulder breath, held tight like the walls were afraid to blink. Sunlight cut through the windows in golden beams, slicing through dust and tension. It felt holy, in a way. Not because of law, because of truth. Judge Camille Rios sat at the bench not as an enforcer of status quo, but as a reckoner, calm, unshaken. Like a woman who already knows how this ends and knows she's the one writing it. In front of her, Maya Ellison, seated beside her grandmother, and a lineup of families who'd once been invisible to the system, behind them reporters, cameras organizers, city officials, and a handful of folks who used to sign checks, while others signed eviction notices. At the defendant's table, Elijah Braddock sat pale small like money couldn't save him anymore. His lawyers were sweaty and bitter, whispering legalese like Hail Marys. But even they knew the tide had left them stranded. Judge Rios cleared her throat. "Before I read this judgment," she said, her voice cutting the room like piano wire, "I want to be very clear. This ruling is not only about law, it is about repair." She lifted a sheet of paper, not thick, just a few pages, but it hit like it was carved in granite. "By the authority vested in me under emergency judicial review," she read, "I hereby rule in favor of Maya Ellison and the class she represents." Boom. A ripple moved through the gallery. Some stood, some gasped. Maya didn't move, just sat frozen, her grandma clutching her hand like a lifeline. "All assets obtained through fraudulent eviction schemes," Rios continued, "are to be frozen immediately. A full investigation is to be conducted in coordination with the Department of Housing and Urban Development and the U.S. Attorney's Office." Braddock's lawyer jumped up like he'd been lit on fire. "Your Honor, we will be filing for immediate appellate relief." Rios didn't blink. "You'll file what you need to file. In the meantime, the people you displaced will finally get to breathe." Reporters scrambled, keys clacked, live feeds lit up with breaking massive civil rights win in Alabama. But Rios wasn't done. "All property under the Hillmere Development Group," she continued, "shall be subject to reparative redistribution under federal housing equity programs. No unit will be sold, rented, or transferred until a full audit has been completed." She placed the document down gently, and finally she said, eyes settling on Maya like a sunrise to the young girl, who told the truth when no one believed her. "This courtroom hears you now." Maya blinked. Tears welled, but she didn't cry. Not really. She just nodded, like a queen accepting her crown. The gallery erupted, not wild, not chaotic, but with reverence. Some clapped. Some simply stood in silence. Maya's grandma whispered something in her ear, and whatever it was, made Maya smile for the first time in that courtroom. Meanwhile, Braddock's team sat shattered. You could practically see the lawsuit drafts forming in their heads, but none of that mattered, because the foundation they stood on, Rios, just cracked it straight through the middle. Outside, news anchors were live. Community members held up signs with Maya's name. A group of kids from her old neighborhood started a chant that echoed down the courthouse steps. "We hear you, Maya, we hear you." And inside, Camille Rios stood from the bench, not with triumph, but with something deeper. Duty. Because this wasn't about one victory. This was about flipping the script, permanently. She handed the bailiff the signed judgment. "This courtroom," she said, "is adjourned. But make no mistake, this story wasn't over." Maya Ellison didn't just walk out of that courthouse. She shifted it behind her, brick by brick, breath by breath. That verdict didn't slam a door. It cracked a damn wall. And through that crack, the whole world started looking in. She didn't say much when the cameras followed her down the steps. Didn't have to. Her silence carried weight now. It wasn't timid anymore. It was the kind that filled space, the kind that made reporters lean in. Not because she owed them a soundbite, but because she'd become one. The girl who told the truth. The girl who made them listen. Within days, the fallout was seismic. Legal boards across the state dropped their usual slowness and sprinted. Montgomery wasn't the only city sweating now. Birmingham, Mobile, Huntsville, all digging through files like they'd just remembered that ethics existed. Retired judges suddenly remembered vacations they forgot to take. Active ones pulled their public calendars offline. Because when Maya spoke, the system flinched. Investigations got launched, whistleblowers started talking. People who used to bury complaints were now digging up their own grave-sized paper trails. At least 12 judges were named in early review. Several more had their rulings temporarily frozen. A handful of law firms started scrubbing their sites clean of urban development, brag blurbs. And all the while, Judge Camille Rios stayed stone still at the center of the chaos. They tried to rattle her. Oh, they tried. Her inbox blew up with everything from, "You're a disgrace to the robe," to "Marry me, Queen One." Anonymous message literally just said, "Hope your breaks work. Classy, right?" But she didn't flinch, didn't raise her voice, didn't seek a spotlight. She was the spotlight. A week after the ruling, she sat down for a national interview. Not the usual staged crap either. No glossy backdrop, no teleprompters, just her, a mic, and a woman across from her asking the real questions. "Do you believe the verdict brought justice?" Camille blinked once, then said, "No. That verdict wasn't justice. It was a beginning." The interviewer leaned in. "Do you regret stepping in the way you did?" Camille gave the tiniest smile. "No," she said, voice like cool steel. "Because when the law forgets its humanity, someone has to remind it what it sounds like." Then she glanced at the camera, not breaking eye contact for a second. And in that courtroom, it sounded like Maya. Boom! That quote hit the internet like a grenade. Memes, posters, TikToks, hell. Someone even made a remix track that played it over a gospel sample. Law students were quoting it in class. Protesters were painting it on signs. It wasn't just a moment anymore. It was a movement. Maya's face showed up on murals across the state. Not just as a victim, but as a voice. A symbol. Schools started adding her case to social studies units. Community centers held forums titled Echoes. Beyond the bench, families once silenced by fear were now emailing lawyers demanding their cases be looked at again. And Maya, she went home to her grandma's tiny apartment, now safe, now protected, and sat on the floor with her back to the window, letting it all sink in. She didn't want to be famous. She just wanted the truth to matter. That night, she wrote a letter to herself, just a short one. "You weren't too small. You weren't too soft. They just didn't know how loud truth could be when it finally got a microphone." And she signed it with the name they all knew now, Maya Ellison.